Outside of the numbers 5, 6, and 7, the number 10 is pretty easy to find out what it is. It's pretty easy to locate, find out what it stands for. 10, of course, is the Gentile number, and the 10th man from Adam is Noah, who's the father of the Gentiles. And so go to Genesis chapter 10, if you would, please. Of course, Genesis chapter 10, there's a lot here on this. And of course, being the number of the Gentiles, it's funny that we as Gentiles, we do our best counting by tens. Isn't that strange? God usually does his counting by sevens, as we saw throughout the number 7. But Gentiles count by either 5 or 10. It's just easier that way. And so Noah's the 10th from Adam, and God started over with him by bringing divine judgment upon the human race. And then Abram is the 10th from Noah. And again, God started over with him by calling himself a people to be his through the seed of Abraham. And so Genesis chapter 10 here, you have what is called the table of the nations, and they're the table of Gentile nations. Of course, there's no Jews yet. That comes around chapter 14 when Abram is actually called a Hebrew from the line of Eber. But here, this is the table of the nations. And in this chapter, you have the first Gentile kingdom that's ever started. And the last kingdom will be Gentile also, which has 10 nations in it. According to Daniel chapter 2, it'll have 10 kings. There'll be 10 kingdoms, 10 nations. And there'll be Gentile nations. Of course, every nation in the world is Gentile nation, except for the Jews, obviously. And so, but Genesis chapter 10, verse 10, the beginning of his kingdom, talking about Nimrod, was Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar. And so his kingdom was Babel, and that will be the ending nation as well. It'll be the nation of the Antichrist, which will have all the kingdoms within it. It'll have the Babylon, it'll have Rome, it'll have Greece. They'll all be combined into the Antichrist kingdom. In Genesis chapter 10, here you find that it is the list of the genealogies of the Gentiles. Genesis chapter 10, verse 5, it says, by these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, every one after his tongue, after their families, and their nations. So this is the first mention of the word Gentiles here in Genesis chapter 10, verse 5. Of course, Genesis chapter 10, verse 10 is the first use of the Gentile kingdom, the very first Gentile kingdom mentioned. If we were to go to Acts chapter 10, we probably will a little later. The door is open to the Gentiles for salvation in the New Testament. There's a total of 10 men, including Peter, that travel from Joppa to Cornelius' house. Cornelius' name shows up 10 times in Acts chapter 10. So, and it has to do with a Gentile, pretty much a centurion of the Italian band, which is basically a Roman Catholic, is basically what he is. And Acts chapter 11 and 12 actually says that 10 men are sent to Cornelius' house, and you have to add it up to get the 10 men, and we'll look at it here in a minute. In Romans chapter 10, is the missionary appeal that goes out to the Gentiles that Paul makes, and it's an appeal that Paul makes to missionaries that will go out to all the Gentiles. In Luke chapter 17, there are 10 lepers that are healed, and one that returns is a Gentile, which, half Samaritan, it's a half Jew, half Gentile, basically. And that's the one that returns to thank God for healing them. that's also 10% that comes back to Christ and thanks him. 1 out of 10%. Luke chapter 10 is a story of the Good Samaritan. Again, half Jew, half Gentile. And that helps the guy that's been beaten. John chapter 10 are the sheep of the other fold. It's the sheep not from the fold of the Jews, but it's a different fold, which is a Gentile fold. And so the other fold is a Gentile flock, which is the church. It's you and I, basically. Exodus chapter 10 is the judgment upon the Gentile world, namely Egypt. Egypt is a type of the world. And so Exodus chapter 10 is the judgment upon Egypt. Revelation chapter 10 is when the Lord puts his foot on the earth and takes possession of all Gentile kingdoms. So we can see right off the bat that 10's the Gentile number. It's really easy to find out. And so, of course, Revelation chapter 10, that's when Christ is given the Gentile kingdoms to rule with a rod of iron. And so there's no doubt about the number 10. It is the Gentile number. The number 10 just happens to appear in the book of Daniel 10 times. Number 10 shows up 10 times. And so the first mention of the word kingdom is found, like we already saw here, is found with the collision of two 10s in the Bible. Genesis chapter 10 and verse 10. And that's Babel or Babylon. Last Gentile kingdom on this earth will be the Antichrist kingdom, which has 10 kings. And that's in Daniel chapter 2, verses 41 to 43. Kingdoms of the one world government, and it's represented by the number 10 in Scripture. And so all the number 10 and everything is in the book of Daniel and shows up quite a bit. Another thing about the number 10 is the tithe that Abram gives to Melchizedek. Abram, who's a Gentile, who's later called a Hebrew, but he's a Gentile first, gave Melchizedek tithes of all. And the tithe is a tenth. Now, he gives the tenth of everything he's taken from the war of the 10 kings. Remember, there's 4 kings against 5, Melchizedek being the 10th king. And so there's 10 kings mentioned in that story. And of course, the tithe is an interesting thing about the tithe. A tithe, it's funny, we talk about giving a tithe every time we make something. That's a good thing, but a tithe is actually an Old Testament thing. It's not a New Testament. It's never put on the church in the Bible. A tithe, when Abram gave the tithe, it was off everything he had. And if you notice, he did it one time, only once throughout his whole life. And it was like it was a reward that he gave Melchizedek, and he never did it again. And so a tithe, it's a tenth. And then, of course, the Jews were to give a tithe to the Levites. And God only required a tithe once in a while. And so it wasn't every time. And so for the church to put that on the church, our job is just to give, which we do. And so, but it doesn't have to. If we wonder, well, how much should I give? Well, tithe is a good place to start. It's biblical and it's a good place, but some people can't give that. And so, and that should be understandable. And so the Lord looks at the heart and what you as an individual is willing to give, and or 5%, then God's happy with that. And so Job, who's a Gentile, has 7 sons and 3 daughters, so 10 children. He has 7 sheep and 3 camels, and 5 oxen, 5 asses. 10, 10, 10, because he's a Gentile. Now, he may be from the line of Shem, but there was no Hebrews, or at that time it was Jacob and Esau, and Job lived at the time of Jacob and Esau. And so Jacob was just having the sons of Israel at that time. So Job's a Gentile, possibly from the line of Shem, like we said. And so 3 times that number of the Gentiles shows up in the book of Job. Now look at Luke 19. Luke 19. Luke chapter 19, and look at verse 10. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. Jew or Gentile? Both. Yeah. Right? I mean, he came to seek and to save anyone, whether Jew or Gentile. But it just happens to be verse 10, right? Verse 11, and as they heard these things, he added and spake a parable because he was nigh to Jerusalem, and because they thought that the kingdom of God should immediately appear. So this parable spoken here, now this is the parable of the 10 pounds here. Now, this parable here is not the same as the one in Matthew 25, the one about the 10 talents. They're 2 different parables. And so in Matthew is the parable of the talents, which is a Jewish weight. In Luke is the parable of the pounds, which is actually an English weight, which is Gentile. All right, so it's a Gentile weight. And so the Lord is directing one parable to the Jews, Matthew 25, and one to the Gentiles, right here in Luke 19. And so now we're going to read it, but the result's different, and the emphasis is different. And so now if you go back to Matthew 25 and read that story, well, there'll be some differences. But here in verse 12, he said, therefore, a certain nobleman went to a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and to return. And he called his 10 servants and delivered them 10 pounds and said to them, occupy till I come. But his citizens hated him and sent a message after him saying, we will not have this man to reign over us. Now this is the Jewish nations and what they're going to say about a Jewish Messiah. And he's telling them to occupy till I come, and they're upset. They don't want him to reign over them. Now notice that. So the citizens hated him and sent him a message after him saying, we will not have this man to reign over us. And it came to pass that when he was returned, having received the kingdom in the millennial reign, in other words, then he commanded these servants to be called unto him, to whom he had given the money, that he might know how much every man had gained by trading. Now, the first thing is up in verse 13, 12 and 13, there's 10 servants. There's 10 pounds. Each one receives a pound. So it's not the same as over there because one guy was given 10 talents, the other one 5, the other one 1, if you remember. So this one's totally different than that one. Now, so there's 10 servants. You have 10 pounds and 1 given to each servant. 1 pound given to each servant. And now it's come when Jesus Christ has come back. He's received the kingdom. He's called these servants to him, and to whom he had given the money, that he might know how much every man had gained by trading. Remember, the other one in Matthew 25, it was by interest. They were supposed to take it and gain interest off of it. Verse 16, then came the first, saying, Lord, thy pound hath gained 10 pounds. So he gained 10. Again, number 10 shows up. And he said unto him, well, thou good servant, because thou hast been faithful in a very little, have thou authority over 10 cities. Again, 10 shows up. And the second came, saying, Lord, thy pound hath gained 5 pounds. And he said likewise to him, be thou also over 5 cities. And another came, saying, Lord, behold, here is thy pound, which I've kept laid up in a napkin. Now remember, the other guy buried it. But this guy just wrapped it up and put it away. For I fear thee, because thou art an austere man, thou takest up that thou layest not down, reapest that thou didst not sow. And he saith unto him, out of thine own mouth will I judge thee, thou wicked servant. Thou knewest that I was an austere man, taking up that I laid not down, and reaping that I did not sow. Wherefore then gavest thou not thou my money into the bank, that at my coming I might have required mine own with usury, which is still interest. And he said unto them that stood by, take from him the pound, and give it to him that hath 10 pounds. And they say unto him, Lord, he hath 10 pounds. He's like, well, Lord, why give it to him? He's already got 10. I mean, I've got 5. That would make 6, But no. And then he says, for I say unto you that unto every one which hath shall be given, and from him that hath not, even that he hath shall be taken away from him. But those mine enemies which would not that I should reign over them, bring hither and slay them before me. So, and let's see. All right. So here now these represent Gentiles. The other is Jews. Now you should notice that the unprofitable servant at the end of Luke's parable here does not go to hell. Now he's killed, but he doesn't go to hell. He doesn't say that. Verses 24 to 27. And so basically he slayed them. They died, but he doesn't say they went to hell. Go over to Matthew chapter 25. Hold your place. Let's see. Yeah, hold your place here, because we'll come back to Luke. But Matthew 25, and look at verse 30. It says, and cast ye the unprofitable servant into outer darkness, there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. This guy goes to hell. See, it's Jewish. But over here in Luke, he's just killed. He doesn't go to hell. He doesn't say anything about hell here. And so, of course, the nobleman, here is Jesus Christ, back up in verse 13, Luke 19. And he calls 10 servants and delivers them unto 10 pounds. Each has a pound apiece, an equal opportunity to serve. And so, and then we saw the outcome of what happened. 2 different outcomes, two different groups of people that the Lord's talking to here. Now in Acts chapter 10, we had made mention. Now look at Acts chapter 10 about Cornelius' house. Now we made mention where we have 10 men that went to Cornelius' house. Actually go to Acts 11 and verse 11. Acts 11:11. And behold, immediately there were 3 men already come into the house where I was, sent from Caesarea unto me. So 3 men. Verse 12, and the Spirit bade me go with them, nothing doubting. Moreover, these 6 brethren accompanied me. We entered into the man's house. So you have 3 that were already come from Caesarea, and there was another 6 brethren from the Jews that went with Peter, along with Peter. That's 10 people. And so Acts 10, we have 10 men went to Cornelius' house, and Cornelius is mentioned 10 times in this chapter. But also Simon Peter's vision covers 10 verses 9 to 18. His sermon that he preaches to Cornelius covers 10 verses 34 to 43. So there's a lot of 10s here in this chapter as well. And then you have 2 Samuel, which is the 10th book in the Old Testament, and then Ephesians is the 10th book in the New Testament. So 10, of course, is to the Gentile church of Ephesus. And 2 Samuel, when David gets his kingdom, it's a type of what's going to happen when David takes the throne, and he's going to put under the Gentile nations. And that's where we're at in chapter 7 of 2 Samuel in Sunday school, is that there's peace round about him at that time. And so it's the Gentile nations are at peace with David, which is a typology of the millennial reign. All right, any questions on any of that? 10's the Gentile number. Yes, sir. Right.
That's all. 100110. I
Huh.
always wondered if 10 it
Mm.
connects somehow. I mean, the number's
Yeah.
in there, but it's
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Yeah. I don't know either. Not sure. And then Romans chapter 10 is also for Jew and Gentile, and it's for our day and age, right? And that's how, for whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. That's Jew or Gentile. There's no difference between Jew and Greek at that time. Once they get saved, we're all put into the family of God and Christians. So called Christians instead of Jew or Gentile. All right. Anything else? All right. Just keep Sunday services in prayer. Um, the Klug family